Chapter 23. I bolted for my room. With each step, my brain sank further and further into the master's perspective. Laurel will never be safe. You'll always find her. You made her, and hers is a glorious purpose. She is 9, and the only way she leaves your custody is if you test her and she fails. Nightshade had told me that the masters didn't kill children, but that hadn't stopped them from leaving one of Laurel's predecessors to die of thirst and heat exposure when he was 6 years old, just 2 years older than Laurel was now. All must be tested. Nightshade's prescriptive statement echoed in my memory. All must be found worthy. If I had been a normal person, I might not have been able to imagine what kind of test these monsters might design for a child, but I could. I could imagine it in horrifying detail. You won't just hurt her. You'll make her hurt someone else. Cassie? Sloane stood in the doorway to our room, hovering outside it, like a force field kept her at bay. Did you figure it out? I asked her. The code. Sloane took a ragged breath. I should have figured it out faster. Sloane, 7 isn't just a number. She didn't let me tell her that this wasn't her fault. It's a person. My heart thudded in my chest as I thought about the fact that my mother had almost certainly been the one to teach Laurel that song. 7 is a person, I repeated. One of the 7 masters. My mouth was suddenly dry. My palms were sweating. Laurel had been safe, right up until the meeting where she'd passed on this information. You know who he is? I know who he was, Sloane corrected. E flat, E flat, E, A flat, F sharp, A, B flat. Those aren't just notes. They're numbers. She pulled a piece of paper out of her pocket. On it, she'd drawn an octave's worth of piano keys. If you sit down at the piano and you number the keys, starting with middle C, she filled the numbers in. E flat, E, I said. 4, 4, 5? Exactly, Sloane said. 7 notes translate into 9 numbers, 2 digits each for A and B flat, 445-97-1011. It took me a moment to make the connection between what Sloane was saying and the fact that she knew one of the master's identities. It's his social security number. That's the thing, Sloane replied. It isn't a social security number, or at least it's not anymore. I've been going in circles trying to figure out what else it could be, but then instead of cross-referencing it against current social security numbers, I decided to do a historical search. How much of this required illegal hacking? A voice asked from the doorway. I looked up to see Leah and, behind her, Michael and Dean. Almost all of it, Sloane answered without skipping a beat. When I went back a few decades, I found it. That social security number was given to a baby boy born in Gaither, Oklahoma 43 years ago. His name was Mason Kyle. I could barely hear my own thoughts over the pounding of my heart. Mason Kyle, I repeated. Why doesn't Mason show up in the database now? Leah asked. Is he dead? That's the thing, Sloane replied, sitting down next to me on the bed. Other than the social security number, there is virtually no record of Mason Kyle ever having existed. No birth certificate, no death certificate, no employment history. Whoever wiped his record wiped it clean. The only reason I even found the social security number was that I hacked a decades-old archive. This was what Laurel had given us. This was what I'd risked her safety for. This was why she was back in their hands. To become a master, you have to leave your old life behind. You have to erase all traces of your prior self. You used to be Mason Kyle, I thought, addressing the words to a phantom. And now, you're a ghost. That's it? I asked Sloane, my stomach heavy, a slight roaring in my ears. When I heard Laurel was missing, I kept looking, Sloane said. I looked and I looked and... She bit her lip and then opened the tablet on her lap, angling it toward me. A picture of a young boy stared back at us. He was 6, maybe 7 years old. This is Mason Kyle, Sloane said. Circa 37 years ago. It's the one and only picture I was able to find. The photograph was faded and fuzzy, like it had been scanned in by someone who didn't quite know how to work a scanner. But I could still make out most of the little boy's features. He had dimples, a smile missing one of its front teeth. He could have been anyone. I should have left Laurel alone. Instead, I led them right to her. The implication that the masters were watching us, that they could be anyone, anywhere, made me think of Daniel Redding's chilling smile. I wish I could be there to see what this group will do to you for coming after them. There's software that does age progressions, Sloane said softly. If I can clean up the image and find the right parameters, we might be able to... I stood. Cassie. Dean was the one who said my name. When he stepped toward me, I stepped back. I didn't deserve comfort right now. I thought of Agent Sterling saying that Scarlett Hawkins had been sacrificed on the altar of ambition. I thought of the promise I'd made Laurel. I lied. Chapter 24. The backyard was pitch black, except for the light from the pool. I'd come out here to be alone, but as I approached the water, it became apparent that I wasn't the only one looking for refuge. Celine Delacroix was swimming laps. As I went closer, I saw that she'd turned on the black light. Like the rest of the house, the pool had been designed to facilitate our training. The outline of a body glowed at the bottom of the pool. Spatter patterns, visible only under the black light, marred the pool's edge. Months ago, Dean had shown me this. He'd tried to convince me to leave the Naturals program. He'd told me that murder and chaos wasn't a language that anyone should want to speak. Realizing that she wasn't alone, Celine turned toward me, treading water. No offense, she said, but you all really suck at hiding the fact that you work for the FBI. This girl was Michael's sister. She was safe here, but if she hung around, she might not be for long. You should leave, I told her. Go back to school. Celine swam to the edge and pulled herself out of the pool, the water clinging to her body. She had to have been freezing, but didn't shiver. I've never excelled at should. I'd heard Michael say the same thing, more than once. Are you okay? Celine asked. No. I didn't bother elaborating and turned the question around on her. Are you? She sat down next to the pool, allowing her legs to dangle in the water, tilting her head back toward the sky. I'm trying this new thing, she told me. Ultimate honesty. No more secrets, no more lies. This was the girl from the painting, the one who painted her self-portrait with a knife. So, in answer to your question, Cassie, I'm not okay. I'm incredibly and quite possibly irreversibly screwed up. That's what happens when you figure out at the ripe old age of 7 that your father isn't your father, and that his best friend is. That's what happens when, at the age of 14, your mother drunkenly admits to your biological father that you're his. And that's what happens when said biological father finally figures out that you know and corners you in your own studio to tell you that your dad, the man who raised you, his business partner and supposed friend, ruined you. That you would be so much more if he'd been the one in control. That if he'd had the chance, he could have stamped the bad blood out of you when you were young, just like he did for his son. Bad blood. I could imagine Thatcher Townsend saying the words, could imagine him beating out of Michael the weaknesses he saw in himself. And then I thought of Laurel. the way she was being raised, the things she was expected to do. The blood belongs to the Pythia. The blood belongs to 9. How did you find out? I asked, my voice hoarse, trying to concentrate on the present and not what my actions had cost the one person in this world that I'd sworn to protect. When you were 7, how did you find out that Thatcher Townsend was your father? I looked at his face, Celine said simply, and I looked at my own. Not just the features, not my eyes or my lips or my nose, but the basic underlying facial structure, the bones. I searched Celine's face for a resemblance to Michael's father, but I couldn't see it. Celine must have sensed some skepticism. I never forget a face. I can take one look at a person and know exactly what their facial bones look like underneath the skin. Creepy, I know, but what can I say? She shrugged. I'm a natural. My breath caught in my throat. Celine didn't know the details of the program, why the FBI had brought us here, what we could do. She didn't know what it meant to be a natural, capital N. But I thought of Michael saying that ever since they were kids, she'd only drawn faces, of the digital photos she'd created of her and Michael. She'd taken a photograph of them as kids, and she'd mentally fast-forwarded with stunning accuracy. There's software that does age progressions. Sloane's statement echoed in my head, and I thought about the role that genes had played in making each of us naturals what we were. Our environments had honed our gifts, but the seed had been there from the beginning. And Celine was Michael's sister. I meant it when I said you should leave, I told Celine, my voice sandpaper rough in my throat. But before you do, I need a favor. Chapter 25. The face that stared back at me from Celine's drawing was one I recognized. Nightshade. The likeness Michael's half-sister had drawn was eerily accurate, down to the boyish expression on the murderer's face. 7, I thought, my heart pounding viciously in my chest. 7 masters, 7 ways of killing. The progression went in a predictable order, starting with the master who drowned his victims and culminating in poison. Nightshade is 7. Nightshade is Mason Kyle. The part of me that had felt numb and hollow from the moment I'd realized that the masters had Laurel began to crack, like ice under the force of a pick. In the past 10 weeks, the FBI hadn't been able to uncover anything about Nightshade's background. Now we had his real name. We knew where he'd been born, and, most importantly, we knew that he'd tried very hard to bury that information. You're the one who brought Laurel to Vegas. You're the one who told me where she was. I felt like my gut had been ripped open, like everything inside of me was leaking out. The man in this drawing had killed Judd's daughter. He'd stalked us, and when we'd caught him, he'd wrapped Laurel up for me in a tidy little bow. Why? Had he been instructed to do so? Had it all been part of some twisted game? I found Agent Sterling in the kitchen, sitting opposite Briggs. Her hands were folded on the table, inches from his. You won't let yourself touch him. You won't let him touch you. She was the one who'd brought me to Laurel. She wouldn't blame Briggs for this. She wouldn't blame me. After Scarlett's death, Agent Sterling had left the FBI because she blamed herself. Celine Delacroix is a natural, I spoke up from the doorway. Right now, wallowing in guilt wasn't a privilege any of us could afford. She did an age progression of a photo Sloane found. Nightshade's name is Mason Kyle. We can use that. My voice broke, but I forced myself to continue talking. We can use him. Chapter 26. It took 16 hours to set up the interview. On one side of the glass, Briggs and Sterling sat opposite Nightshade. On the other side, Dean, Michael, Leah, and I watched. We'd left Sloane at home with Celine and Judd. The only adult on our side of the glass was Agent Sterling's father. This will work, I thought, my throat tightening. It has to. I understand that you feel you have nothing to say to us. Agent Sterling began the interrogation like it was a conversation, treating the serial killer's feelings and desires like they were completely valid. But I thought this picture might change your mind. She laid an image on the table. Not Mason Kyle, not yet. For now, Agent Sterling needed an entry point, something to tax the killer's capacity for silence. In this case, a picture of Laurel. Did you call her Laurel? Agent Briggs asked. Or 9? No answer. They have her, you know. Agent Sterling's voice was even and calm, but there was something intense about it, like each word that passed her lips was a living, breathing thing. We hid her, but not well enough. They found her. Maybe they always knew where she was. Maybe they were just biding their time. I should have protected her, I thought fiercely. I should have been there. Beside me, Dean laid a hand on the back of my neck. I wanted to lean into his touch, but didn't. I didn't deserve to be touched. I didn't deserve to feel safe. I didn't deserve to do anything but sit here and watch the man who'd killed Judd's daughter reach for the picture of Laurel. You brought her to Las Vegas with you, Agent Sterling said. Why? If I didn't know better, Briggs commented once it became clear that Nightshade wasn't going to say anything himself. I think that you cared for the child, that you wanted to get her away from the life she was living. All Nightshade offered up in response to those words was another stretch of deafening silence. He wasn't happy when he found out the Masters had her again, Michael informed the agents. We were mic'd. Briggs and Sterling could hear us. Nightshade could not. But he's not surprised, and he's not upset. If he's feeling anything right now, it's longing. What are you longing for? Not Laurel. Something else. Someone else. Ask him about my mother, I said. When the FBI caught you, you cashed in your last chip, your only chip, to speak to me. You took Laurel away from the other Masters. You told me things that no one outside of your hallowed walls was ever supposed to know. Did Lorelei ask you to get her little girl out? Agent Briggs asked. Did she whisper a desperate plea in your ear? The Pythia doesn't whisper. The Pythia doesn't plead. I could feel those words, or something like them, simmering just below the surface of Nightshade's silence. The FBI cannot begin to fathom who and what the Pythia is. To you, to your brethren, you won't tell them. Silence is power. Show him Mason Kyle, Dean suggested beside me. Take away his power, I thought. Take away his silence. Agent Sterling didn't say a word as she pulled out the photograph Sloan had found of Mason Kyle. Michael let out a long whistle. His chin just jutted out ever so slightly. He can barely keep his lips from pressing together. Look at the way his hands are folded on the table. There's tension in his thumbs. He's angry, I inferred, and he's scared. I thought about everything I knew about Nightshade. He's angry that he's scared and scared that he's angry, because he's supposed to be above things like that. He's supposed to be above it all. My understanding of emotion came from a different place than Michael's. It had nothing to do with the muscles in Nightshade's jaw or the glint in his eyes, and everything to do with knowing what a man who lives to win felt when he realized he'd bet everything on the wrong hand. When he realized that he'd lost. This is an age progression of that photograph. Agent Briggs pulled out the sketch that Celine had done for us. As Nightshade stared at his own face, Agent Sterling went on the offensive. Mason Kyle, Born in Gaither, Oklahoma, Social Security number 445-97-1011. That was the sum total of what we knew about Mason Kyle, but that was enough. We were never supposed to know your name. You were supposed to be a phantom, a ghost. Even sitting in a cell, you were supposed to have the power. I'm a dead man. The words were barely audible. Months of silence had not been kind to the killer's throat. I am not worthy. To the masters, that's a death sentence, I thought. A Pythia who is not worthy dies in battle against her successor. When a child is shown to be unworthy of the mantle of 9, they're left to die in the desert. And a master who fails in his duty? It will be painful. It will be bloody. Nightshade, Mason Kyle, stared through the agents like they weren't even there. She cannot afford to let it be otherwise, not after choosing to let me live until now. My mouth went cotton dry. She, as in my mother. The Pythia? Agent Sterling said. She's the one who decides if you live or die? No answer. Let me talk to him, I requested. Neither Briggs nor Sterling gave any sign that they'd heard me. Let me talk to him, I repeated, my fingers curling themselves into fists and releasing, again and again. I'm the only one he's ever really spoken to. He won't tell you about my mother because you're not a part of this, but in his eyes I am, or at least I could be. The last time I'd spoken with this man, Nightshade had told me that maybe someday the Pythia's choice, to kill or be killed, might be mine. With a slight nod, Agent Sterling removed her earpiece. She set it on the table and turned up the volume so that Nightshade could hear. It's me. I struggled to find the right words. Lorelei's daughter. Your Pythia's daughter. I paused. I think my mother is the reason you took Laurel when you left for Vegas. You weren't supposed to. And you certainly weren't supposed to tell me where she was. You all but gift-wrapped her for me, knowing I would hand her over to the FBI. My sister hadn't been tested. She hadn't been deemed worthy or unworthy, and you let her go. Still no reaction, but I could feel myself getting closer. You treated Laurel like a child, not like your future leader, not like 9. I lowered my voice. She told me about the game she plays when my mother is in chains. If I'd been on the other side of the glass, I would have leaned forward, invading his space. You know what I think? I think my mother wanted Laurel out. She can be very convincing, can't she? She can make you feel special. She can make you feel like you don't need anyone or anything else, as long as you have her. You sound like her. Your voice sounds like hers. That was all I got in reply. 9 words. You took Laurel away from that place for her. You knew they'd find a way to bring the child back. You knew the other masters wouldn't be happy with you, but you did it anyway. And now you're saying that my mother is going to tell the others that you have to die? Why? I let that question hang in the air. Why would she do something like that after all you've done for her? Haven't you learned yet? The reply was low and fatally amused. The Pythia does what she has to do to survive. And to survive, she'll have to tell them to kill you? You mentioned the game, but do you know what that game involves? I know it involves my mother chained to the wall. I know it involves blood. In order to render judgment, the Pythia must first be purified, Nightshade said. To admit someone to our ranks, she must go through the rite of 7. 7 days and 7 pains. I didn't want to imagine the meaning behind that phrase, but I did. 7 masters, 7 ways of killing people. drowning, burning, impaling, strangling, knifing, beating, poisoning. 7 pains, I said, the thudding of my heart drowning out the sound of my words in my own ears. You torture her for 7 days. If she rules the acolyte unworthy, he is discarded. We find another, and the process is repeated. Again and again and again. You're enjoying telling me this. You like that it hurts me, just like you like hurting her. Why did you save Laurel? I asked, dully. Why take her with you when you knew they would take her back? There was no answer. I waited, letting the silence build, and when he showed no sign of breaking, I turned and walked out the door. My steps never faltered as I entered the interrogation room myself. The expression on Briggs's face told me that I'd pay for this later, but my attention was focused wholly on Nightshade. He raked his eyes over my face, my body. He drank in every detail of my appearance, and then he smiled. Why bother helping 9 break free of the masters if you knew they would get her back? I repeated. I could see Nightshade's thoughts in his eyes, see him searching my features for a resemblance to my mother. Because it gave the Pythia hope, he said, a smile crossing his lips. And nothing hurts the way hope does when you take it away. A flicker of white-hot rage burned inside of me. I stepped toward him, every muscle in my body taut. You're a monster. I am what I am, and she is what she is. To save herself, she has condemned others. She will condemn me. After they torture her for 7 days? I said, my voice low. Agent Sterling stood to prevent me from going any closer. Nightshade angled his head downward. His body shook. It took me a moment to realize that he was laughing. Silent, amused laughter that made me physically ill. For lesser matters, a single rite of purification will do. If the masters are feeling generous, they might even give her a choice. A choice of how she's tortured. My stomach revolted, but I clamped my jaw closed, refusing to give in to the bile rising in my throat. And what if they don't like the answer she gives them? I asked, once I had control. What if she tells them to let you live? She won't. Nightshade leaned back in his seat. Because if her judgment appears compromised, they'll purify her again. Torture her again. Where is she? I asked sharply. Tell us where they are, and we can stop this. We can keep you safe. No, Cassandra, Nightshade said with an almost loving smile. You can't. You. This time, it was the knife. Five's weapon. Quicker than some, slower than others. Chaos and order, order and chaos. Now you're on the floor, and your memory is full of holes. You don't remember Laurel coming back. You don't remember how or when she got the bruises on her throat. But you do remember your blood dripping off of Five's knife. You remember the music and the pain and telling the masters that the traitor had to die. You remember Laurel dipping her fingers in your blood, smiling the way you taught her. Did I do good, Mommy? She asks, curling up in your lap. The wheel turns. You tried to stop it. But some things will not be stopped. Chapter 27. The FBI put Nightshade in isolation and installed agents to watch him round the clock. By 2 a.m., he was dead. The masters can get to anyone, anywhere. Today is April 2nd. I forced myself to say the words out loud, standing in front of the evidence wall in the basement. 4-2. The first of 4 Fibonacci dates in April. April 4th is next, I continued. April 5th, April 23rd. Cassie. Dean came up behind me. I'd been down here since we'd returned home. I'd barely blinked when we'd gotten word that Mason Kyle was dead. You need to sleep, Dean murmured. I didn't reply, staring at the victims on the wall. I thought about the fact that for each string of 9 victims, Apithia had given the go-ahead. She'd deemed an acolyte worthy to kill, because if she didn't, the pain would start all over again. You choose abuse survivors, you choose fighters, and you make them sentence others to die. Cassie. Dean stepped in front of me, blocking my view of the wall. You can't keep doing this to yourself. I can, I thought, and I will. Look at me. Dean's voice was familiar, too familiar. I didn't want comfort. You've barely slept since Laurel went missing. You don't eat. Dean wouldn't let up. It ends now, Cassie. I pretended that I could see through him. I knew this wall well enough that I could hold each and every photo in my mind's eye. When we discovered that my father had a copycat, I withdrew. I beat at a punching bag until my knuckles were bloody. And do you remember what you did? Tears threatened my eyes. I knelt in front of you and wiped the blood from your knuckles. I pulled you back from the edge every time you went too far. Dean latched one arm around my torso and the other around my knees and lifted me into his arms, physically prying me away from the wall. I could feel his heartbeat in his chest as he carried me toward the basement door. Drop me, I thought, my body going stiff as a board. Just drop me. Just let me go. Dean held me close as he carried me all the way to my room. He sat down on the end of my bed. Look at me. His voice was gentle, so gentle, it undid me. Don't, I choked out. Don't be gentle. Don't hold me. Don't save me from myself. You think what happened to Laurel is your fault. Stop, Dean. Please don't make me do this. Please don't make me say the words. And you've always believed, deep down, that if you hadn't left your mother's dressing room that day, if you'd just come back sooner, you could have saved her. Every time the police asked you a question you couldn't answer, what you heard was that you weren't enough. You weren't enough to save her. You weren't enough to help them catch the people who did it. And now they're hurting her. The truth burst out of me like shrapnel, exploding with deadly force. They're torturing her until she gives them what they want. Permission, Dean said softly. Absolution. I rolled away from him, and he let me. Days' worth of exhaustion caught up to me in an instant, but I couldn't close my eyes. I let myself sink into my mother's perspective. It's not that I don't have a choice, I said softly, not bothering to tell him that I wasn't speaking for myself anymore, that I was speaking for her. I always have a choice. Do I suffer, or does someone else? Do I fight it? Do I fight them? Or do I play the role they've cast me in? Do I have more control, more power if I make them break me, or if I play the Pythia so well that they stop thinking of me as a thing that can be broken? Dean was quiet for several seconds. Against the 7 of us, he said finally, you will always be powerless. He bowed his head. But against any one of us, you hold the cards. I thought of Nightshade, dead in solitary confinement. If I say you die, you die. But first, one in our number has to ask. The Pythia passed judgment, but she didn't bring the cases. One of the masters had to present an issue for her to rule on, and before making a decision, she was tortured. If enough of the masters opposed her answer, she was tortured again. "You chose me because I was a survivor," I whispered. "Because you saw in me the potential to become something more." "We chose you," Dean countered, "because at least one among us believed that someday you might come to like it, the power, the blood. Some of us want you to embrace what you are. Some of us would rather you fight it, fight us." This group followed very specific rules. After their 9th kill, they were done, permanently. "What you do to me is the closest any of you can come to reliving the glory. You drag a knife across my skin or watch it blister under a flame. You hold my head underwater or make me watch as you push a metal rod through my flesh. You close your fingers around my neck. You beat me." I thought of Nightshade. "You force your most painful poison down my throat. And every time you hurt me, every time you purify me, I learn more about you. 7 different monsters, 7 different motivations." My mother had always excelled at manipulating people. She'd made her living as a psychic, telling people what they wanted to hear. "Some of us," Dean said after a moment's thought, "are easier to manipulate than others." I thought again of Nightshade. My mother hadn't ordered his death when he'd been captured. The masters had almost certainly presented the matter for her judgment, but she'd held out, and at least some subset of them had let her. "Nightshade was a newly minted member of this group when they took my mother," I said slowly, trying to think of facts, any facts that might shed light on their dynamic. "He completed his 9th kill 2 months before she was taken." I forced myself back into my mother's point of view. He was competitive. He was daring. He wanted to break me. But I made him want something else more. I made him want me. What he wanted was immaterial. Dean closed his eyes, his lashes casting shadows on his face. "The Pythia will never belong to one man." "But one of you must have identified me as a potential Pythia," I said. I thought again about how new to the fold Nightshade had been when my mother was taken. "One of you chose me, and it wasn't Nightshade." I waited for another insight, but nothing came, and that nothing ate away at me like a black hole sucking every other emotion in. I couldn't remember who might have been watching my mother. I couldn't remember anything that might have told us how, and by whom, she'd been chosen. Dean lay down beside me, his head on my pillow. "I know, Cassie. I know." I thought of Daniel Redding, sitting across from me and gloating about the way he'd inserted himself between Dean and me. Every time our hands brushed, every gentle touch. I don't need gentle right now. I let myself turn toward Dean, let my breath catch raggedly in my throat. I don't want it. I reached for Dean, pulling him roughly toward me. His hands buried themselves in my hair. Not gentle, not light. My back arched as his grip on my ponytail tightened. 1 second I was beside him, and the next I was on top of him. My lips captured his, rough and hard and warm and real. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking. I couldn't save Laurel. I couldn't save my mother. But I could live, even when I didn't want to, even when it hurt. I could feel. Chapter 28. I dreamed, as I had so many times before, that I was walking down the hallway toward my mother's dressing room. I could see myself reaching for the door. "Don't go in. Don't turn on the light." No matter how many times I had this dream, I was never able to stop myself. I was never able to do anything but what I'd done that night. Grapple for the light switch, feel the blood on my fingers. I flipped the switch and heard a faint rustling, like leaves in the wind. The room remained pitch black. The sound got louder, closer. And that was when I realized it wasn't rustling leaves. It was the sound of chains being dragged over a tile floor.
That's not how you play the game.
The room was flooded with light, and I whirled to see Laurel standing behind me. She was holding a lollipop, the kind she'd been staring at the first time I'd seen her.
This is how you play the game.
Hands slammed me back into the wall. Shackles appeared on my wrists. Chains slithered across the floor like snakes. I couldn't breathe, couldn't see. You can do better than that. It took me a moment to realize that the chains were gone. Laurel was gone. The dressing room was gone. I was sitting in a car. My mother was sitting in the front seat. Mom? The word was strangled by my throat. Dance it off, my mom told me. That had been one of her go-to phrases. Every time we'd left a town, every time I'd skinned a knee. Dance it off. Mom, I said urgently, suddenly sure that if I could just get her to turn around and look at me, she would see that I wasn't a little girl anymore. She would see, and she would remember. I know, my mom called back over the music. You liked the town and the house and our little front yard, but home isn't a place, Cassie. Suddenly, we weren't in the car anymore. We were standing on the side of the road, and she was dancing. We all have choices, a voice whispered behind me. Nightshade emerged from the shadows, his gaze on my mother as she danced. The Pythia chooses to live. He smiled. Perhaps someday that choice will be yours. I woke with a start to find Dean asleep beside me and Celine Delacroix standing in the doorway. I came to say goodbye, she said. Michael performed an impressive encore of your "You Don't Belong Here and You Need to Leave" number. If there was one thing my last conversation with Celine had taught me, it was that she did belong here. But I couldn't blame Michael for wanting to send her away. The rest of us were in this. We were already in danger. Celine didn't have to be. When this is over, I started to say. Celine held up one perfectly manicured hand. Unless you feel like letting me in on what this is, don't. She paused. Take care of Michael for me. I will. I couldn't make that promise out loud. And if you get a chance, Celine continued, a subtle smile pulling at the edges of her lips, put in a good word for me with Sloane. She didn't wait for a reply before strolling out the door. Beside me, Dean stirred. What do you need? He asked me quietly. I needed to do something other than stand in front of the wall in the basement, waiting for a body to show up. I needed to get out of this house. I needed to follow up on the one lead we had. I need to go to Gaither, Oklahoma. You forget sometimes what it was like before. Before the walls, before the chains, before the turning of the wheel and the bleeding and the pain, before the rage. They bring photographs to show you what they did to Seven. They place another diamond around your neck. Your fingertips gingerly touch the edge of a photograph. Proof of death. There was blood. There was pain. You did this. Judge and jury, you held his life in your hands. You did this. You killed him. You smile. Chapter 29. The town where Nightshade had been born wasn't the kind of place where the FBI turned up on a regular basis. Gaither, Oklahoma, population 8,425, Sloan rattled off as we stepped out of the rental car. In the early days of Oklahoma's statehood, Gaither thrived, but its economy collapsed during the Great Depression and it never recovered. The population has dwindled and the average age of residents has risen steadily for the past 60 years. In other words, Gaither had more than its share of senior citizens. 3 museums, Sloan continued. 13 historical landmarks. While local tourism is a substantial source of income for the city proper, the surrounding rural communities rely primarily on farming. The fact that there was tourism in Gaither meant that we could get the lay of the land without announcing our intentions, or the fact that Agent Sterling was carrying a badge. Agent Briggs had stayed behind in Quantico. I didn't fool myself as to why. April 2nd. Today was a Fibonacci date, and Laurel's disappearance was almost certainly a harbinger of things to come. Judd had accompanied us to Gaither, as had Agent Starmans. My gut said that Briggs had sent the latter to protect Sterling as much as the rest of us. Don't think about that, I told myself as we began the walk down historic Main Street. Think about Mason Kyle. I tried to picture Nightshade growing up in this town. The storefronts had a Victorian charm to them. Stone signs detailed the town's history. As I laid a hand flat on one of them, an odd feeling came over me, like something was missing. Like I was missing something. "You okay?" Agent Sterling asked me. In an attempt not to look like a cop, she'd chosen to wear jeans. She still looked like a cop. "I'm fine," I told her, glancing back over my shoulder, then forcing my eyes to the front. As we turned a corner, a wrought iron gate came into view. Beyond it was a stone path, landscaped on either side with all manner of plants. For a split second, I couldn't breathe, and I had no idea why. Dean walked ahead and stopped at the sign in front of the gates. "Either Redding is constipated," Michael said as he took in a subtle shift in Dean's body posture, "or things are about to get interesting." I walked toward Dean, overcome with the uncanny sense that I knew what the sign was going to say. Poison garden. Those were the words I expected to see. Apothecary garden, I read instead. Apothecary, Sloan said, coming to stand next to us. From the Latin word meaning repository or storehouse. Historically, the term was used to refer to both the historic version of a pharmacy and to the historic version of a pharmacist. Without waiting for a reply, Sloan bopped past the gates. Leah followed her. Dean slid his gaze over to me. "What do you think the chances are that it's a coincidence that Nightshade grew up in a town with an apothecary garden and—" Dean jerked his head toward the building next door. "An apothecary museum." A chill spread slowly down my spine. Nightshade's weapon of choice had been poison. There was a thin line between knowing the medicinal properties of plants and knowing how to use them to kill. "I can sense this is a romantic moment for the two of you," Michael said facetiously, patting us each on the shoulder. "Far be it from me to ruin it." He strolled past us into the garden, but the way he glanced back tipped me off to the fact that he recognized the unsettled feeling twisting in my gut. "If you folks think that garden's something," a voice called out, "you should venture inside." An older man, my guess put his age in the neighborhood of 70, came to the door of the Apothecary Museum. He was small and compact, with round spectacles and a voice at odds with his appearance, deep and scratchy and utterly uninviting. A much younger guy came to stand behind the old man. He looked to be 19 or 20 and wore his white blonde hair combed back, accenting a widow's peak hairline. "The garden is free for all to enjoy," Widow's Peak said tersely. "Visitors to the museum are asked to make a donation." He may as well have stuck a giant no trespassing sign over the building's entrance. Agent Sterling moved to stand beside me. "I think we're fine with the garden for now," she told Widow's Peak. "Figures," the boy muttered, retreating into the building. There was something about him that gave me the same unsettled feeling that had coated my body the moment I'd seen the wrought iron gates. "You folks stay cool," the old man advised us, his gaze lingering on Sterling. "Even in spring, Gaither heat has a way of sneaking up on you." Without another word, he followed Widow's Peak back into the museum. Agent Sterling preempted any comment from Dean or me. "Walk through the garden, pretend you're enjoying this lovely spring day, and think about what you've learned," she advised. "You want us to take this slow, to avoid tipping our hand." I did as instructed. St. John's wort, yarrow, the alder tree, hawthorn. As I passed each labeled plant in the garden, I parsed my first impressions. My gut said that the older man had lived in Gaither all of his life. Widow's Peak was protective of him, and of the museum. You don't like tourists, but you work in a museum. That spoke of either a contradictory personality or a lack of employment options. I turned on the path, following the loop back to the iron gates. As I reached them, I got that same sense of déjà vu I'd had when I saw the garden for the first time. I'm missing something. As I scanned the surrounding street, I pegged a pair of tourists, then turned my attention to a local walking her dog. She turned around a corner and disappeared. I didn't mean to do more than follow her around the corner to see what was on the next block. But once I started walking, I couldn't stop. I'm missing something. I'm missing... Dean caught up to me. The others weren't far behind. I caught sight of our protection detail out of the corner of my eyes. "Where are we going?" Dean asked. I wasn't following the dog walker anymore. She'd gone one way, I'd gone another. Gaither's historical charm had melted away blocks back. Now there were houses, most of them on the small side and in need of repairs. "Cassie," Dean repeated, "where are we going?" "I don't know," I said. Leah fell in beside us. "Lie." I hadn't realized that I was lying, but now that Leah had called me out, it was clear. I do know where I'm going. I know exactly where I'm going. The niggling feeling of déjà vu, the deeply unsettling something that had fallen over me the moment we'd stepped foot in this town, solidified into something more concrete. "I know this place," I said. I hadn't been sensing something off about Gaither. I'd been sensing something familiar. "I know," my mom whispered in my memory. "You liked the town and the house and our little front yard." There had been so many houses over the years, so many moves, but as I came to a stop in front of a quaint house with blue siding and a massive oak tree that cast shade over the entire lawn, I felt like someone had tossed ice-cold water directly into my face. I could see myself standing on the front porch, laughing as my mom attempted to throw a rope over a branch on the oak tree. I made my way to the tree and fingered the tattered rope swing that hung there. "I've been here before," I said hoarsely, turning back to the others. "I lived here, with my mother." Chapter 30. Nightshade had been born in Gaither. Decades later, my mother had lived here. That couldn't be a coincidence. Hyper-aware of the blood rushing through my veins, I forced myself into the master's perspective. Each of you chooses your own apprentice. Who chooses the Pythia? I took a step toward the house, my heartbeat drowning out all other sounds. Nightshade wasn't the one who selected your mother. Dean's voice broke through the cacophony inside my head. If I had, Dean said, shifting from third person to first, I wouldn't have waited until Lorelei's daughter joined the Naturals program to introduce myself. Frozen halfway between a memory and a nightmare, I thought of Nightshade, of the way his shoulders had shaken with laughter when I'd interrogated him, of his still, gray corpse. If you didn't choose my mother, there's a good chance that the same person chose you both. This changes things. Agent Sterling whipped out her cell phone. She'd brought us here hoping to gain some information about Mason Kyle, who he had been before becoming Nightshade, how long ago he'd disappeared from this town. She hadn't expected to find a direct tie between Gaither and the Masters. I forced air into and out of my lungs, forced my racing heart to slow. This is the break we've been waiting for. This is our chance. And based on the unearthly calm with which Agent Sterling had spoken, the way she'd gone from person to agent in 2 seconds flat, she knew it. There is a 98% chance you're calling Agent Briggs, Sloan assessed Agent Sterling, and a 95.6% chance that you're going to try to pull us out of Gaither. You can't. My mouth was too dry to form the words. I won't let you. We came here looking for a needle in a haystack. Sterling's uncanny calm never faltered. And we just found a sword. We'll have to reassess the risk involved in poking around Gaither. If Judd and I say you're out, you're out. No arguments, no second chances. Briggs's phone must have gone to voicemail, because Sterling didn't say anything else before she hung up. You're pushing down an adrenaline rush. Michael took his time reading Agent Sterling. You're frustrated. You're scared. But more than anything, beneath the Agent Veronica Sterling mask, you look the way a thrill seeker does, frozen at the top of the roller coaster, hovering on the verge of plunging down. Agent Sterling didn't bat an eye at his commentary. We'll have to reassess the risk, she said again. I knew that she was thinking about Laurel, about Scarlett Hawkins, about collateral damage and the true meaning of risk. I'm not going anywhere, I said, my voice as intense as Sterling's was calm. I'd spent years berating myself for the holes in my memory, for the fact that I couldn't remember half the places my mother and I had lived, for the fact that I hadn't been able to tell the police a single thing to help them identify the person or people who had taken her. I wasn't leaving Gaither, Oklahoma, without answers. About my mother, about Nightshade, about the connection between the two. I'll quit the program if I have to, I told Agent Sterling, my throat tightening. But I'm staying. If Cassie's staying, Sloan said mutinously, I'm staying. Dean didn't have to say that he was staying too. I do find Cassie borderline tolerable, Leah commented casually. It would be a shame to leave borderline tolerable behind. Michael smiled in a way that wasn't really a smile, his skin pulling tightly against the remnants of bruises. Judd! Agent Sterling turned for backup, her voice tightly controlled. I wondered if Michael could hear a full spectrum of emotion underneath that control. I wondered how close Veronica Sterling was to becoming the woman she'd been before Scarlett was murdered. Someone who felt things deeply. Someone who acted before she thought. Judd looked at me, then at each of the others in turn, before casting a sideways glance at Agent Sterling. First rule of raising kids, Ronnie, he said, in a way that reminded me that he'd had a hand in raising her. Don't forbid them from doing something if you're certain they're going to do it anyway. Judd's discerning gaze landed back on me. It's a waste of a good threat. An hour later, Agent Briggs still hadn't returned Agent Sterling's call. Today is a Fibonacci date, and Briggs isn't answering his phone. I wondered if he was knee-deep in a crime scene, if it had begun. "We need some ground rules." Agent Sterling had checked us into Gaither's one hotel, assigning Agent Starmans to continue trying to get through to Briggs as she briefed the rest of us. With controlled and precise movements, she laid a collection of small metallic objects on the coffee table, one after another. "Tracking beacons," she said. "They're small, but not undetectable. Keep them on your persons at all times." She waited until we'd each picked up a beacon, about the size and shape of a breath mint, before continuing. "You go nowhere alone. You're in pairs or more at all times, and don't even think about ditching whichever of us is on your protection detail. And finally," Agent Sterling pulled 2 guns out of her suitcase and checked to make sure the safeties were on. "You know how to handle a firearm?" Agent Sterling looked at Dean, who nodded, before she shifted her gaze to Leah. I wondered if the 2 of them had been trained to handle weapons before I'd joined the program, or if Agent Sterling had singled them out because of experiences in their pasts. Leah held her hand out for one of the guns. "I do, indeed." Judd took first one gun, then the other from Agent Sterling. "I'm only going to say this once, Leah. You don't draw your weapon unless your lives are in imminent danger." For once, Leah bit back her smart-mouthed reply. Judd gave her one of the guns, then turned to Dean. "And," he continued, his voice low, "if your lives are in danger, and you do draw your gun, you'd better be prepared to shoot." "You've already buried your daughter." I translated the meaning inherent in Judd's words. "Whatever the fallout, you won't lose us." Dean's hand closed around the gun, and Judd turned eagle eyes to Michael, Sloane, and me. "As for the rest of you hooligans, there are 2 types of people in a town this size. People who like talking, and people who really, really don't. Stick to the former, or I will jerk the lot of you out of here so fast you get whiplash." There was no questioning that order. I could hear the military man in Judd's cadence, his tone. "This is an information-gathering mission," Sloane translated. "If we see a hostile..." "Do not engage." Chapter 31. The best place to find people who wanted to talk was the local watering hole. In this case, we quickly zeroed in on a diner. It was just far enough away from the historic part of town to serve primarily locals, but not so far that they didn't get the occasional tourist. Perfect. Mama Rhee's Not a Diner. The sign above the door told me pretty much everything I needed to know about the establishment's owner. "But Cassie," Sloane whispered as we stepped into the restaurant, "it is a diner." A woman in her early 60s looked up from behind the counter and gave us the once-over, as if she'd heard Sloane's whispered words. "Help yourself to any table you'd like," she called after she'd finished studying us. I opted for a booth by the window, in between a pair of senior citizens playing chess and a quartet of even older women gossiping over breakfast. Sloane wasn't kidding when she'd said the average age of Gaither's citizens was on an incline. Leah and Sloane slid into the booth beside me. Dean and Michael took the other side, and Sterling and Judd helped themselves to stools at the counter. "We don't do menus," the woman who'd told us to take a seat, Mama Rhee, I was guessing, set 5 waters down on our table. "Right now it's breakfast. In about 10 minutes it'll be lunch. For breakfast we have breakfast food. For lunch we have lunch food. If you can think of it, I can cook it, so long as you're not expecting anything fancy." She said fancy like it was a dirty word. "I could go for some biscuits and gravy." Dean's southern accent got a smile out of the woman. "Side of bacon," she declared. It wasn't a question. Dean was nobody's fool. "Yes, ma'am." "French toast for me," Leah requested. Rhee harumphed. My gut said French cut too close to fancy, but wrote down Leah's order nonetheless before turning her attention to me. "And for you, Missy?" Those words took me back. This wasn't my first time at the Nada Diner. I could see myself in a corner booth, crayons spread out on the table. "I'll have a blueberry pancake," I found myself saying, "with strawberry sauce and an Oreo milkshake." My order caused the unflappable woman to pause, as if that combination was familiar to her, the way the apothecary garden had been to me. "You're not the type to gossip with outsiders," I thought, "but you might share some interesting tidbits with one of Gaither's own." "You probably don't remember me," I said, "but I used to live in Gaither with my mother. Her name was Lorelei." Ree beat me to it. Then she smiled. "And that would make you Lorelei's Cassie, all grown up." She gave me another once-over. "You favor your mother." I wasn't sure whether that was supposed to be a compliment or a warning. Get her talking, I thought, about Mom, about the town, about Mason Kyle. "I don't remember much about living here. I know it was probably only for a couple of weeks, but—" "A couple of weeks?" Ree raised both eyebrows so high that they nearly disappeared into her graying hairline. "Cassie, you and your mama lived here for almost a year." "A year?" I felt like she'd punched me in the stomach. I could forgive myself for forgetting a couple of weeks out of a largely transient childhood, but a year? An entire year of my life that, if I'd even remembered the town's name, might have given the police a lead on my mother's case years ago? "You were a bitty thing," Ree continued. "6 or so, quiet, well-behaved, not like my Melody. You remember Melody?" The second I heard the name, I got a flash of a young girl with pigtails. "Your granddaughter. We were friends." I never had friends. I never had a home. These were the truths of my childhood. "How's your mama doing these days?" Ree asked. I swallowed and looked down at the table in front of me. "She died when I was 12. Another truth of my childhood that had turned out to be a lie. "Oh, honey." Ree reached out and squeezed my shoulder. Then, with the no-nonsense manner of a woman who'd raised multiple generations of children, she turned to Sloane and Michael and took their orders. "You know grief," I thought. "You know when to comfort and when to let things be." Once Ree made her way into the kitchen, Michael offered an observation. "She was fond of your mother, but there's anger there, too." If my mother and I had lived here for nearly a year, what had made us hit the road again, and what, exactly, had my mother left in her wake? Our food arrived, and I spent the entire meal trying to decide how to get Ree talking. I needed details about my mother's life in Gaither, about Mason Kyle's. As it turned out, I didn't have to ask Ree to talk. Once we'd finished breakfast, she pulled up a chair. "What brings you back to Gaither?" she asked. "Murder, kidnapping, centuries of systematic torture." "We brought Cassie's mom's ashes," Leah answered on my behalf. "Lorelei's body was discovered a few months ago. Cassie said this was the place she would have wanted to be laid to rest." I'd already admitted to not remembering much about my time in Gaither, but Leah was Leah, and Ree believed every word out of her mouth. "If there's anything I can do for you," Ree said plainly. "Cassie, honey, you just let me know." "There is one thing." This was the opening I'd been waiting for. "If my mom and I were here for a year, that's the longest we ever lived anywhere. I can't remember much of it. I know my mother loved it here, but before I scatter her ashes—" I closed my eyes for a moment, allowing the real grief that lived inside me to make its way to the surface. "I'd like to try to remember why." I wasn't anywhere near Leah's caliber as a liar, but I did know how to use the truth to my advantage. The longest we ever lived anywhere. I can't remember much of it. I'd like to remember why. I don't know how much I can tell you. Ree was nothing if not frank. Lorelei was the type to keep to herself. She swept into town doing some kind of balderdash dog and pony show, claiming she was psychic, helping people connect to their dead loved ones, reading fortunes. Ree snorted. The city council wouldn't have let her stay for long, but Marcella Waite is a sucker for that kind of thing, and she's known for 3 things around these parts: loose lips, a rich dead husband, and a tendency to badger city council members until they give her what she wants. So far, this story was a familiar one. Your mama came in here 2 or 3 times those first couple of weeks with you in tow. She was young, skittish, though she did a good job hiding it. Ree paused. I offered her a job. Waitressing? I asked. I'd worked as a waitress at a diner before Briggs had recruited me to the Naturals program. I wondered if some part of me had remembered my mother doing the same thing. Ree pursed her lips. I have a bad habit of hiring waitresses who've seen the ugly side of life. Most of them are running from something. I never knew what that something was for Lorelei. She didn't volunteer the information, and I didn't ask. She took the job. I gave her a good deal on rent. The blue house with the big oak tree, I said softly. Ree nodded. My daughter had recently vacated the premises. I had Melody and Shane with me, so it seemed a shame to let the house go to waste. Vacated the premises. I translated those words based on the way that Ree had said them, as in, took off and dumped her kids with you. It was easy to understand why Ree might have had a soft spot for a young single mother struggling to support her daughter. Home isn't a place, Cassie. My mom's litany had stayed with me for years, but now I heard it differently, knowing that, however briefly, we'd had a home once. Was my mother close with anyone? I asked Ree, memories swirling just out of reach. Involved with anyone? Your mama always did have an eye for good-looking men. This was Ree, trying to be diplomatic. Then again, she also had an eye for trouble. Not that diplomatic. Ree narrowed her eyes at Dean. You trouble? She asked. No, ma'am. She turned to Michael. You? He offered her his most charming smile. 100%. Ree snorted. That's what I thought. The door to the restaurant opened then, and Widow's Peak from the Apothecary Museum walked in. Ree smiled when she saw him, the way she had when Dean had ordered biscuits and gravy. You remember Shane? Ree asked me. My grandson? Shane. I could feel a memory hovering just out of reach. Ree started to stand. Did my mother know a man named Mason Kyle? I asked before she could leave. Ree stared at me. Mason Kyle. She shook her head, as if trying to clear it of memories. I haven't heard that name in 25 years. He left Gaither when he was, 17 or so? Long before your mama came to town, Cassie. As Ree made her way toward the counter, and her grandson, one of the older women at the table behind us clucked her tongue. Shame what happened to the Kyle family, she said. Downright tragic. What happened? Sloane asked, twisting in her seat. The old man playing chess on the other side of us turned to look at her. Got killed, he grunted, by one of those people. What people? Poor little Mason wasn't more than 9 or so, the tongue-clucking woman said. Most people hereabouts think he saw the whole thing. I pictured the little boy from the photograph, then thought of the monstrous killer he'd become. Enough! It was clear from the tone in Ree's voice and the immediate reactions of those around us that her word was law. With a nod, she turned back to her grandson. Shane, what can I get you? Before the question was out of her mouth, Shane saw something out the window. His whole body tensed, and he slammed out of the diner and charged into the street. I looked out the window in time to see him striding toward a group of a dozen or so people. They walked in lines of 4. Various ages, various ethnicities. Every single one of them was dressed entirely in white. Shane attempted to approach a girl standing behind the others, but a man with thick hair, ink black and shot through with gray, stepped in front of him. "Going to go out on a limb," Leah said, her eyes locked on the oncoming confrontation, "and guess that those people are emissaries from the Friendly Neighborhood Cult."